nice subdivision, nice people. Everybody gets along well, and I just don't understand it.
Neighbors say the deadly shooting happened minutes after children got home from school.
So the school bus had just dropped by, the kids got off the bus, and then the shooting happened.
The neighbors say the 20-year-old man who was killed lives in the subdivision.
I see him sitting outside or, walking his dog. He would speak to everyone in good manners.
While neighbors are heartbroken for the family, they're also on edge.
Very scary. Question is, is it over? That's the main question because, it was multiple people involved.
Police say this is a very active investigation. They have not released the name of the man who was killed, and they are not saying if the shooter is still on the run. Reporting live in DeKalb County, Denise Dillon, Fox 5 News.
Bar that serves alcohol until 4 a.m. East Point city law allows businesses to serve alcohol that late, but a string of problems at the business, including a recent homicide, have city leaders considering changing the cutoff time to midnight.
Just heard a news report on somebody airdropped a message to someone. What that is, I don't know. Said there was a bomb on board the airplane. It's currently on the ground at Hartsfield. I don't know what's going on with people these days.
Followed standard protocol, notified the authorities, and that flight landed safely at Hartsfield-Jackson around 9:20 tonight.
We know passengers and bags have been coming off the plane, and passengers and their bags will be bused to the terminal. Atlanta police and fire are there. The FBI is going to be taking the lead on this investigation. Frontier says no physical evidence of an explosive device has been found on board by the flight crew. We do know that traffic is backed up around the airport. Our crew has been stuck in some of that as they are trying to make their way to the scene.
Taking a look at our other top stories tonight in Clayton County, the father of a 6-year-old who was brutally beaten is telling us that he's making a good recovery in the hospital. He suffered broken bones, blood clots, and bleeding on the brain as a result. Police say the boy was beaten by his mother's boyfriend. That man and the boy's mother both face multiple charges.
And in East Point, city leaders are considering
Alaska Airlines flight executive and Alaska Airlines flight executing a go-round in Portland, Oregon, veered into the flight path of a SkyWest flight taking off from a parallel runway. The FAA, Congress, and the aviation industry must treat these near misses as precursor events that, left unchecked, will eventually result in a deadly catastrophe. We have many layers of safety in our aviation system. The first layer is the pilot controller readback. The second layer is all the airport designs and markings. Next is the runway safety lights that turn red when the runway is active, alerting a crossing pilot to not cross. In ideal situations, the fourth layer is a ground radar tool. And of course, the last line of defense lies with the flight crew, especially the captain and first officer. Despite multiple layers of safety, far too many near misses have come down to the last line of defense. And bottom line, a system that repeatedly forces pilots into taking emergency evasive actions to save lives is either a broken system or one that is overwhelmed by new risks. Such new risks could be the result of aggregate loss of experience and has forced the industry to confront a workforce that overall is less experienced, from pilots to controllers to technicians and other personnel.
You are tuned into the Senate Aviation Subcommittee's hearing.
Okay, if you were smuggling people, you were smuggling drugs, you were dealing in guns, right? And you were doing this in New York, and the American federal government got their hands on you, what's going to happen to you? You're going down. You're going down for 25 years. You're going to be in jail, right? Well, this is your border security. These are the people who you're trusting to keep 150 or 200 Hamas terrorists from slowly infiltrating themselves into the United States and creating this type of mass coordinated terror cell, right? That's your next, this is your new normal, right? The slow infiltration of terrorists who are going to get into the United States, be embedded for a year or 2 years, organize themselves, and they'll go nuts. They'll go nuts in, I don't think they would do it in New York City because New York City's got, they've got now a tradition of dealing with these types of security problems. They've got a high level of intelligence. But you take any middle American city, Des Moines, right? What do you do if they go nuts in Des Moines? You got 150 guys going out there, right? You have a real problem. And your mobilization is not going to be, 4 hours like the Israeli army, right? Small territory, small geography, and you do have an army there, right? How long will it take? What if you got 400 guys, 100 guys in 4 American cities all at the same time? Middle American cities, right? 500,000 to 1 million population. It's a disaster waiting to happen. It's not 1,000 deaths, it could be 10,000 deaths. There is all of a sudden this cultural shift where we've come to the realization that if the strongest state in the world, that's the most dedicated to protecting its citizens, with the infrastructure in place to do that, wasn't able to do it, then boy, oh boy, like what do you do in a Pacific nation that's just not geared to protect its citizenry? It's an important question.
Yeah. Causing the generational shift, we have a lot of people from Israel. They go to America, they go to college there, they come back with this sense of, maybe Israel shouldn't exist. They think that, Palestine, the Palestinians, they were kind of displaced when Israel came to be. Why would they start to develop that kind of thought, and what is your response there?
Well, first of all, I think it's historically absolutely false. Right? There's this crazy idea that Israel was colonialized the same way South Africa was colonialized, that white people went to a country where there were, of indigenous people and pushed themselves on these indigenous people. That's not the truth of Israel. First of all, the driving culture and the driving ethnic majority within the Jewish community in Israel are Jewish Arabs, are Jewish Middle Easterners from Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Yemen, Ethiopia, black Jews. These people are not in Israel because they wanted to be there. They're in Israel because they were kicked out after 1948 of Muslim lands. They were told, you need to pack up and go. You're no longer welcome here after having lived here for 1,000 years. That's a huge vector of the Israeli population. This idea that it's just a homogeneous Jewish white European population is a big lie. It's not true. You've had non-Jewish governments in Israel, but having non-Jewish governments in Israel did not mean that you did not have Jewish people in Israel. You do find in Israel tons, thousands and thousands of people who've never left, who are always there, right? So Israel's a necessity for the people who are living there, right?
Even the non-Jewish people living there.
Well, here's the kicker. This is what's really, really interesting in terms of what's going on. It's not, the fight is not an Arab versus Jewish fight. It's not a Muslim versus a Jewish fight. It's a terrorism Hamas fight right now versus Israel. And what does that mean? That means you have millions, not thousands, but millions of Arab Israeli who are now who are in this war on Israel's side. You have people, the soldiers at the border right now who are going to, go into Gaza to free Israel of the scourge of Hamas. These soldiers are, yes, Jews, but they're also Druze, D-R-U-Z-E. They're also, which is a separate monotheistic religion that has a huge population, ethnically Arab, but it's a different religion. And they have their citizenry in Syria and Lebanon and Israel. But these guys are in uniform right now, and they're fighting for the IDF. You've got Bedouin Arabs who are, from the southern part of Israel, who are in uniform fighting for Israel. So it's a good versus evil fight. It's not a Jewish versus Arab fight. It's not a Muslim versus Jewish fight. It's a fight about democracy. It's a fight about human rights. It's a fight between failed states, failed dictatorships versus, thriving democracies. Countries that are trying to expand human rights. And so the analogy is perfect. It's the same fight that we're having right now between America and the Chinese Communist Party. It's the same fight that America is having with Iran. It's the same fight that we're having with Russia. And we can't look at it any differently.
Stay tuned as Joel Etienne shares how the Chinese regime monitors and persecutes Chinese people overseas. We'll be right back.
be in Midtown Atlanta tonight for this rally in support of Palestinians as the war between Israel and Hamas continues. The group demonstrated around 8 near Spring and 14th Streets. Organizers urged supporters to show solidarity for Palestinians and to stand together for justice and human rights. We spoke with a number of students on why they are out marching and what it means to them.
I'm worried. My country, I've never even been able to visit it because the borders have been closed. I've never gotten to meet my family other than Zoom calls and FaceTime, but they're so precious to me. And when I think about them being out there with no food, no water, no electricity, no medication, one of them's pregnant, it breaks my heart.
The crowd moved through the streets holding placards and chanting, and Atlanta police blocked traffic as the marchers made their way through Midtown.
About an hour earlier and a mile southwest, pro-Israel supporters were finishing up a prayer vigil at Georgia Tech. Organizers say they wanted to come together with the Jewish community on campus to show support after the hatred they've witnessed at Georgia Tech. They say they were praying for an end to the growing wave of anti-Semitism. They also prayed for those who've been injured, killed, or held hostage during Hamas's attack.
I'm very disheartened to see the hatred on campus. Specifically, there was some vandalization of one of the Jewish fraternities. I don't support the violence in any way.
Organizers say the Jewish community feels unsafe on campus, and they want to create a comforting environment, they say.
An Atlanta man is accused of threatening to kill a Georgia congresswoman. The U.S. Attorney's Office says Sean Patrick Cirillo called Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene's office and said he was going to murder her. Authorities arrested the 34-year-old today. Greene's office filed a complaint after receiving the call. That led to Cirillo's arrest. He's scheduled to appear in federal court Monday. Now, Greene was not the only Georgia politician at the center of a threat investigation today.
Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger says an envelope laced with fentanyl was sent to a Fulton County elections worker. Authorities are treating the incident as an act of domestic terrorism, and they promise to track down the sender. They're trying to track it down before anyone comes in contact with it. Secretary Raffensperger says he hopes that they can intercept it before it arrives.
It was really yesterday that we became aware of the situation, that there's actually still an envelope that was traveling, in the mail headed towards Fulton County. This is domestic terrorism, and it needs to be condemned by anyone that holds elected office and anyone that wants to hold elected office anywhere in America.
Secretary of State Raffensperger says this is a federal crime. Law enforcement at all three levels, local, state.
Wanted to purchase prostitutes? They had to give the network their full names and email address, phone number, their employer, and a reference if they had one. Now, of course, the reason for the case is getting broad attention right now is not because a prostitution ring was busted. Look, in New York right now, there's even open prostitution. It's unfortunately so common right now that they don't even try to hide it. The reason people care about this case is because of the types of clients it had. And suspicions may have something to do with espionage, what are known as honey traps. Now, part of that would be the use of prostitution for blackmail. The other would be the use of prostitutes to have spies gain access to people in key positions. Maybe a high-level official looking for a girlfriend, or maybe an individual with security clearances who would let a woman access some of those key documents. Without a doubt, though, the case had some very odd traits that should raise some suspicions. The clientele would be in the targeted category for a spy operation like this. And it does seem odd that the clients had to give their names of their employers and give personal information on that level. Now, look, normally you'd think criminals would shy away from documenting their clients like that. You'd imagine they want to keep their books mostly empty, given that keeping records of these types creates a paper trail that could incriminate them, which now are incriminating them. It raises some real questions on why they were doing those things. Now, in my personal opinion, an easy comparison would be, say, a high-end escort dating service. While they're generally understood as being services for prostitutes, they maintain normally a system of plausible deniability. So it's fair to ask why this network chose to operate so differently. Still, again, it's all speculation at this point. The three individuals being charged, they're facing charges of conspiracy to coerce and entice to travel to engage in illegal sexual activity. That carries a penalty of up to 5 years in prison and a fine of up to $250,000. Now, there were rumors this could be a Chinese spy ring. In fact, I saw a lot of places covering it like that. Going by the available documents, though, it does not look like there are any China ties. It does appear at least that two of the individuals were from Korea, although it's not clear what their ethnicity was. Now, of course, this does not necessarily end all possibilities that it might have been tied to China somehow. But again, none of the available evidence has anything on that. But regardless, it remains very interesting given who the clients were. And the affidavit leaves things open that some of them may be charged in the future. This was a ring that included politicians, business executives, and people along that social strata. It states these individuals are not being withheld from the public to protect them in terms of their identities, but instead, because the investigation into their involvement is, quote, active and ongoing. In other words, we're likely going to hear more about this criminal network in the future. Now, in other news, one of the major narratives used to drive woke censorship is now being exposed as yet another case of fake moralism. This, of course, has to do with Israel and Palestine. And most importantly, that it seems we're now watching a wave of anti-Semitism and pro-terrorist rhetoric coming from the political left. Now, let's start by having a look back in the past. Let's go back last year and the year before. Now, look, until very recently, we were being told that hate was on the rise in America. NPR reported in December last year that, quote, high-profile entertainers and athletes have openly spouted anti-Semitic tropes. It claimed that former President Donald Trump dined recently with an outspoken Holocaust denier. And the Texas Tribune claimed that an alleged surge in anti-Semitism was a precursor to fascism. And this was framed as a problem for the political right, a concerning trend that growing hate in America could bring a new form of totalitarian fascism and possibly even lead to some types of violence. Now, there were waves of criticism, you might remember, against Ye, formerly known as Kanye West. Now, that was after he began criticizing Jews on social media and in news interviews. Now, Kanye was actually locked out of his Twitter account. CNN reported that corporate America was canceling Kanye West and that brands were dropping him as fast as they could. Celebrities came out to criticize him. It seemed the whole establishment was on board with fighting against this anti-Semitic comments. And it got even worse in October. A group of 6 people hung 3 banners over a freeway in Los Angeles. One of them said, Kanye is right about the Jews. And that 6-man protest drew criticism throughout the entire nation. The Office of California Governor Gavin Newsom released a statement on the banners saying this weekend's anti-Semitic protests in LA were disgusting and cannot be normalized or brushed aside. Words matter, and in California, we'll always speak out against racial, ethnic, and religious hate when it rears its ugly head. The White House press secretary posted a statement along those same lines, saying that Biden, quote, ran to heal the soul of the nation after years of hate and division. And as part of the healing, she says, we need to call out anti-Semitism everywhere it rears its ugly head. President Biden even took action to form an interagency group in December 2022 to counter what was framed as anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and related forms of bias and discrimination within the United States. Now, that group, which is actually created now, is led by staff in the Domestic Policy Council and the National Security Council, and it coordinates with the U.S. government on these operations. Now, its first job, as stated last year, according to a White House announcement, was to, quote, develop a national strategy to counter anti-Semitism. And that included new tools to address anti-Semitic harassment and abuse, both online and offline, and to encourage what it referred to as a, quote, whole of society effort to counter anti-Semitism and build a more inclusive nation. Now, this was used in calls to censor online speech as well, you might remember. It had been reported by NPR in 2021 that anti-Semitic posts on social media was rarely being censored. And when Elon Musk was criticized for not censoring heavily enough on X, again formerly known as Twitter, he had to go on the defense for free speech. He even met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu just a couple months ago in this September. And then just a month after that, everything suddenly changed. That was when an estimated 3,000 Hamas terrorists raided Israel on October 7th, where they murdered, raped, and kidnapped Israeli civilians. Now, before Israel even responded, the far left was coming out in open support for Hamas. Socialist organizations, including Democratic Socialists of America, they began organizing pro-Palestine rallies. Black Lives Matter was posting images in solidarity with the terrorist paragliders. The so-called squad of far-left politicians, they came to the forefront of pro-terrorist and anti-Semitic rhetoric. And ironically, the Democrat Party is now being divided over this issue. Just yesterday, for example, 22 House Democrats joined with Republicans to censure Representative Rashida Tlaib for her pro-Palestine and anti-Israel statements and rallies. Members of the squad that she's part of are accusing other members of the Democrat Party right now for endangering Tlaib with their votes. And there's even alleged backlash over the issue within the White House. Politico reported, for example, that a leaked memo just showed that U.S. diplomats were in a fury at President Biden's, relatively pro-Israel stance. And they're allegedly angry that Biden is not criticizing Israel for the treatment of Palestinians. Huffington Post followed up on this. They claimed that there was a mutiny brewing in the State Department over the Biden administration's stance on this. And it's not just in politics either. It's also happening at the grassroots level on the political left again. Hamas supporters just occupied a building of BlackRock, one of the leading organizations on woke corporate investment. There were ongoing incidents of people tearing down posters of kidnapped Israelis. It was also just revealed reporters for establishment news outlets, including Reuters, AP, CNN, the New York Times, they appear to have been embedded with the Hamas terrorists when they launched their attack to kill Israeli civilians. This is raising new questions of whether these news outlets had been aware of the attacks beforehand, although they do deny it. In other words, it appears that the political and media establishments were using the old trick of criticizing others of what they themselves were doing. Now, in other news, hundreds of hospitals are being closed down across the United States. We'll be talking more about this after the break.